Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the Holocaust Center's Director of Education. Thank you to our community partners on today's program, Holocaust Museum Houston, Latino Initiatives at Holocaust Museum Houston, SELO, the Seattle Latino Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. This program is being recorded and will be available on our website starting tomorrow. The views, information, or opinions expressed in these programs are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the Holocaust Center for Humanity. We at the Holocaust Center for Humanity acknowledge that our Holocaust Center is on the ancestral lands of the Duwamish people, the first people of Seattle. The Duwamish are a people who are still here, continuing to honor and bring light to their ancient heritage. Today is Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday was created in 2012 as a simple idea, a day that encourages people to do good. Over the years, it has grown into a global movement that has inspired people to give and celebrate generosity. Giving Tuesday shows us the power of what can be accomplished when people open their hearts and their minds and give in whatever way they are able, whether it's their time, their money, their knowledge, or energy. Giving Tuesday is the belief that when we all work together, we can create a better world. In late March, we transitioned all of our programs to online virtual offerings. We didn't miss a beat, and the demand for these programs has only increased over the months. On this Giving Tuesday, please consider supporting the Holocaust Center for Humanities virtual programs. Gifts today will help to support our Lunch and Learn programs like this one, online teacher workshops like one that we have this Thursday on the topic of spiritual resistance, virtual field trips, and our virtual speakers bureau. After one recent virtual field trip, the teacher wrote to us, "In this time when we are all impacted by COVID-19, we are so grateful for the Holocaust Center for continuing to be a place where we can bring our students for important learning and exposure. We are so appreciative of everything the Holocaust Center does to ensure that our students know about the Holocaust and have the courage to stand up to injustice in their own lives." Your support today fuels these programs, providing meaningful opportunities to engage and learn for students, teachers, and the greater community. One participant at a recent Lunch and Learn program like today's wrote, "Once again, thanks to the whole team at the Seattle Holocaust Center for their work in presenting such high quality gatherings. If there's one thing for which I can be grateful during the COVID-19 confinement, it is definitely my access to your Tuesday Lunch and Learn sessions. Your group has discovered some key figures in human rights activism." We are putting a link in the chat where you can donate to support these virtual programs. Thank you for considering us on Giving Tuesday. Our Lunch and Learn programs aim to present perspectives and voices that challenge and inspire people. Our speaker today perfectly fits this description. I'm so honored to have with us Dr. Michelle Tovar, Associate Director of Education-Latino Initiatives at Holocaust Museum Houston. Dr. Michelle Tovar is responsible for building bridges between the Latino community and the Holocaust Museum Houston. Her initiatives include outreach to bilingual dual language school programs, creating educational workshops and events for teachers, parents, and community leaders, and working with local and national organizations dedicated to serving Latinos. Michelle earned her EDD at the University of Houston in Curriculum and Instruction in K-12 social education with an emphasis on social justice education. She was a Smithsonian Latino Museum Studies Fellow and a 2017 and 2019 Fulbright-Hays Scholar. Michelle will take questions at the end of the program. Please use the Q&A option on your screen to type in questions at any time. And if you are watching on Facebook Live, please enter questions in the comments. Michelle, thank you so much for being with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ilana. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you again for the invitation. Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm also going to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land of the Karankawa, the Coatican, pardon me with the pronunciation, Atacapa, and the Sana peoples in which Holocaust Museum Houston resides on. My pronouns are she and her. Again, I am Associate Director of Education here at Holocaust Museum Houston, and I've been at the museum since 2015, but it feels like I've had a very long relationship with the museum. As a young person, I used to come to the museum because in school I had never learned about the Holocaust, and it wasn't until I saw a documentary when I was in high school that I began to research around the city and where could I learn more about this history. And I found out about Holocaust Museum Houston, and since then I have felt connected to this community. I brought my parents here when I was young. Having a mother that only spoke Spanish, walking through the museum with her and seeing how she was impacted by the history, and wanting to ask and learn more about it, I felt that it was important that the museum have some type of representation for everyone of all backgrounds, of all languages. That's been a part of me. That's what's been motivating me throughout my career here at Holocaust Museum Houston. Um, it's been an honor being here. Prior to my work, I was a public school teacher. And again, the curriculum did not have much information on the Holocaust. Teaching fifth grade students, I was able to bring in a bit of the history through some historical fiction, through Number the Stars and Anne Frank's diary. But I felt that it was important that the students get to know a little bit more about the history of the Holocaust. So I became a fellow here at the museum in 2011 through the Warren Fellowship. And through the guidance of Dr. Mary Lee Wiebeck, I was able to bring that into my space, into my classroom, to get the students to understand the importance of this history and why it is relevant in this time. So as was mentioned, I was a museum studies fellow, and I never had meant to leave the classroom. I always thought I was going to be a classroom teacher for a very long period of time. But when I was offered the opportunity through Dr. Wiebeck to be a part of the Latino initiatives here at the museum, I felt incredibly honored to be a part of that. Because again, representation matters, especially in museum spaces that are very Eurocentric. The majority of students that do walk through these doors are from Black and Brown communities. And I felt that it was important that we do begin to bring in those narratives and that representation. And I'm going to present that to you today through some PowerPoint slides to show you what we've done here at the museum to make that cross-cultural connection and to amplify those voices that haven't really been heard in our community. So I'll go ahead and share the screen. Okay. So why does representation matter in museum spaces? That's a question that we've asked, right? Why should it matter in a museum that's about the Holocaust? As I mentioned before, many of our students that do walk through these doors, here in Texas especially, are of Latino background. One of our largest school district, the Houston Independent School District, brings in about 52% students that are of Latino background. And many of these students are English language learners. So as museum educators, we had to find ways to make an inclusive space for these students, to provide opportunities for them to learn and ask questions, to feel comfortable in the space as well. And I believe we've done that through language accessibility. First of all, we have expanded our museum. We've been around, we'll be celebrating actually our 25th anniversary in 2021. And the museum expanded last year in 2019, completely renovated and changed. And one of the things that we added was language accessibility to be bilingual in English and Spanish. And that's through audio tours, through visuals, and in our galleries, you will see bilingual text. And that's incredibly important. Again, going back to my mother being a Spanish speaking person walking through this space, she didn't have that accessibility then. And now we have this space where people can come in, feel important and included to be a part of the history, to understand the history. So we follow in the steps of El Paso's museum, who is the first bilingual museum in Texas. And so I think that's been an incredible change for us to do that. We've had several people come to us and tell us, thank you for including Spanish in your space, because now they can have conversations with a Spanish speaking individual in their family and enhance the conversation and talk and take this discussion beyond the museum walls. Representation also needs to be seen in our staff. And we've done that by hiring staff that is inclusive to our community. We want that representation to be seen as soon as our constituents, our visitors walk in through the door, they see themselves, they see someone that they can go and ask a question to. It's incredibly important to have staff that looks and represents the community. Of course, security. Understanding, as a museum, we understand that security is very important, especially in a Holocaust museum in this space. But we also need to understand and empathize with Black and Brown communities and how law enforcement can feel and affect people. So we are very sympathetic and understanding to the way our security is present at the entrance of the museum. We are very We've worked with anti-bias training to make sure that our security is aware of that type of intergenerational trauma, etc. And we do have docents and volunteers that represent our community as well. And I'll show you an example of one of our docents in a few minutes of the importance of having Spanish-speaking docents and volunteers that can help and guide in our community, in our space with this history. That has been an important step that we've done here at the museum. For the longest time, we've always had a very white male representation of our docents, and now we've expanded to be more inclusive, to have Spanish-speaking Latino representation in our space, which is incredibly important with our students and our community. And admissions, understanding how we price tickets and how we are pricing our programming for the community and understanding the needs of the community and what we can offer and help. And exhibits, I'll show you a few exhibits that we've worked with recently and how we have connected to the community, to the history of the Holocaust and to other atrocities that we include here at the museum. As well as content and programming is incredibly important. Again, bringing in these narratives that haven't been talked about. One of the main things here at Holocaust Museum Houston has been also the addition of a human rights gallery, a permanent human rights gallery that highlights the atrocities that have occurred after the Holocaust, that occurred actually before the Holocaust. We also recognize the North American genocide here in this museum space. So having the human rights gallery in this museum provides us a platform, a foundation to bring in narratives that we haven't before. So one of our first exhibits that was representative of our community was from the Smithsonian, from the sites department. It was called the Bracero Program, and it highlighted the history, Bittersweet Harvest, the Bracero Program. It highlighted the history of the Bracero Program from 1942 through 1965. And this is a history that isn't commonly talked about or taught in schools, but was incredibly important because it was significant during World War II, when many of the men in the United States were off at war. There wasn't enough labor force in the country for agriculture, railroads, etc. So the Bracero program was very important and an important part of history here in the United States. However, this exhibit does highlight the significance of the men that were a part of the program, but also what they faced, the discrimination, the prejudice, the racism. And it was important for us to have this exhibit at the museum because, again, going back to human rights, we wanted to also highlight and connect to our mission about teaching the dangers of discrimination, of hate, of apathy, for using the lessons of the Holocaust to do that. But this exhibit was able to highlight another narrative. We were able to create oral histories, oral testimonies from families here in the Houston area who had fathers who were braceros or grandfathers who were a part of it. And it was important for us to collect those narratives because we didn't have many here in the Houston area that we could highlight. I show this image at the bottom of a young woman and her father because I actually ran into them in the exhibit and was very curious to ask, what they thought about this exhibit. And she was telling me that this was an assignment that was given to her by her professor. And she had mentioned it to her father that she wanted to come to the museum, but she had never been before. She didn't feel comfortable. She didn't know what to expect. Well, her father asked her, "Why are you coming?" And she said, "Well, I have to do an assignment on the Bracero program." And at that moment, he explained to her that she had Bracero history in her family and that she had never known about. So that moment triggered this family history to come out and to talk to each other, to connect with one another as a family because of this exhibit in this space. And I thought it was incredibly important for them, to share that. And I was very honored to hear their story. And I'm glad that they were able to connect that history. And it also, you can see a picture of a conjunto group called Los Gatos del Norte, who performed here in this museum. And so if you can imagine, at the opening of the exhibit, we had this beautiful music playing throughout our space, echoing through the walls, that had never been in this space before. So that's incredibly important as well. Bringing in music, bringing in culture that hasn't been a part of it, with respect to the space, right? We were acknowledging the beauty of this music, but also respecting that this is a memorial as well. So with the success of the Bracero program, 2 years later, actually last year, 2019, we were able to bring another exhibit from the Smithsonian that was on the story of Dolores Huerta. And if you do not know who Dolores Huerta is, I'll mention another common name, Cesar Chavez. Dolores Huerta co-founded the United Farm Workers Union with Cesar Chavez, but she isn't commonly talked about in curriculum in schools because, of course, she was a woman. And because of that, her story's always been put in the background. Cesar Chavez has always been amplified, and with respect, of course, with his work. But it was time for Dolores to be heard and to be seen. And so the Smithsonian created this beautiful exhibit that focuses on her story, on who she was as a young woman, who she became, and what she's currently doing now. Um, and what's incredible about this exhibit, why it was an opportunity for us to bring it, is because she did cross-cultural work. She did work with the Black community, the Jewish community, the Asian community. And this was a great way, again, for us to show that there's work being done intercultural, right? Not only was it highlighting her narrative, it was also highlighting the stories of other people who are commonly not talked about. We got to hear about the Filipino experience, and we got to learn about the Jewish advocacy and alliance with the United Farm Workers. This was an incredible exhibit, and we were honored to have Dolores Huerta actually visit our museum and hear from her her personal experience. She did receive the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Medal Award in 1998 and the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama in 2012. Again, an incredible woman. She is featured in our Human Rights Gallery. And again, we want to make sure that we connect our histories, and we want people to understand that this is intertwined. Because of Dolores's exhibit, we were able to invite students from all over the Houston area. And I wanted to share this picture with you because this is a group of students from a middle school here. The majority of these students are from Guatemala. They are migrants here and immigrants. And when they came to this exhibit, they had read Dolores Huerta's picture book. They learned about her history in their classroom, but then they came into this space and were able to see her, her sweater, able to see her medal, her images, her pictures, and they connected to them. They felt like they were a part of it. They were able to bring what they had read in their book and comprehend it in the context, but then able to see it and be able to be up close and personal with this history was incredibly important to them. Many of the students there said that they felt just overwhelmed by the fact that we had this history in this museum space. Now, this had been the first time that these students had been to our museum. Many of them were Spanish speakers. And so we had a wonderful curator from the Smithsonian lead this tour in Spanish with the students to highlight the narrative of Dolores Huerta. But because of this experience, because they had such a positive impact and experience, they came back a few months later to have a tour of the Holocaust Gallery with a Spanish-speaking docent. And if we did not have a Spanish-speaking docent, it would have been a little bit, of course they would have had the text, but at the same time, it wouldn't have been so impactful. And we felt that because they had the Spanish-speaking docent, they were able to connect and feel more comfortable asking questions. Again, they were incredibly impacted by the history of the Holocaust Gallery. And they were able to go back into the classroom, ask more questions, and we were able to provide them with resources that they could continue their learning with. So just to give you a few more examples of the exhibits and programming that we've done here at the museum, I wanted to highlight in yellow some of the important programs we've had. We have had lecture series on intergenerational trauma and memory. That's history that's carried on through generations. For example, our Holocaust survivors and second gen. In this case, we focused on the Latino intergenerational trauma. We talked about healing. We brought a curandera into our space, a healer, to talk about healing, right, through our traditional practices. We brought in scholars that talked about narratives that aren't commonly talked about in Texas, such as the atrocities that have occurred on the border in the early 1900s with Mexicans and Mexican Americans and the Texas Rangers. So these are important topics that, again, we want to make sure that we want our public programs to provide that. We also want our students to be aware of it. We've screened films like Cuatro Puntos Cardenales that highlights the history of El Salvador, breaking those stereotypes of the rhetoric that's recently been heard about immigrants from Central America and Mexico. We also had the opportunity to screen Dr. Ruth Behar's film, Adioqueria, which is an incredible film about her history being of Cuban Jewish descendants. And from Out of the Shadows, the Latino Liberators of World War II. So you see here the image of Johnny Marino, who is a Mexican-American World War II liberator. And he is incredibly important to our museum. He was a speaker in schools. He was a constant visitor here, and I had the opportunity to hear him once and tell his story. Again, this is important that we have representation, and I bring him to your attention because not too long ago, the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission created an exhibit that focused on liberators in Texas. However, when we looked at the exhibit, we saw that every person that was featured in the exhibit was a white liberator. And of course, going back to understanding our audience, our Black and Brown students that were walking through our public, there was no representation there. So with the curatorial department, we were able to research and do some work to highlight those stories, Johnny being one of them. And we were able to include Jesse Reyes as well, who's another liberator. But unfortunately, when we researched our African-American liberators, there wasn't many in the Texas area within our area because, of course, during the time, their testimonies were not taken because of racism and oppression. So I know we have still some work to do, and we hope that eventually we can bring those narratives and amplify those voices as well. They should be included in this exhibit. But it was very important for us to have Johnny Marino's voice heard and seen. And I want to share with you a bit about his testimony and why it's important for us to have this for students here.
I thought I had seen war, death at Omaha, at the Battle of the Bulge, but I never was prepared to witness something like Hadamar. I believe that all of us that were there at the time, that came back home, We'll never forget this. I know I haven't.
So again, and this oral testimony is available on our website if you'd like to hear the entire testimony. But it's important for our students to see who is who is a liberator. The liberators that the students think are only of white liberators, we wanted our students to see that there were Latino liberators, there were liberators of all backgrounds, and we wanted to make sure that they had that representation. So we were able, again, as I mentioned, to include his story in that exhibit. That exhibit has been traveling throughout Texas into communities of color, many Latino communities, and it's been incredible to know that those two men are part of this exhibit and that they can be seen and their stories will live on as well. I want to give props to an amazing woman who's working at the United States Holocaust Museum at USHMM, Christina Chavarria, who has amplified the voice of Anthony Acevedo, who was a prisoner in Berga and is registered as a Holocaust survivor through USHMM. If you don't know the story of Anthony Acevedo, I highly recommend that you look them up through their website. He is Mexican American. Again, his story is very important. And he had a diary during the time that he was in prison, and so we had the opportunity to learn his story, what his experience was. So if you haven't had the opportunity to look at that, I highly recommend that you do. She's doing incredible work there as well for representation. We have collaborated with universities throughout this area, throughout Texas, throughout Houston, to again bring in those human rights narratives that we commonly do not talk about. For example, Dr. Yolanda Chavez Leiva has talked about the work that she's done on the US-Mexican border with children's drawings, children's artwork that's created in detention centers. Again, the relevance of this and understanding and making that human connection to what's happening in other parts of the world. We've collaborated with organizations like the Houston Writers Coalition to bring in the voices, right? The voices of people, how they're being impacted. And so definitely trying to amplify the immigrant experience and understand and show solidarity, right, with the community. Just recently, we started to work with Rice University with a wonderful project that is going to help preserve the archives of a museum in the Dominican Republic in the Sosua area, to preserve their archives, but also to bring their narrative to our community. And we are working currently on public programming to highlight the history of the Jewish experience, the Jewish refugee experience there. And through that, we want to do that through music. We want to do that through the cross-cultural work that's been done and how they impacted one another. So it's been a great opportunity to work with them. And again, bringing in that Latin American, that Latino experience into Jewish history as well. And we did that recently through the Latinx Heritage Month. We created a virtual lecture and film series in which, again, we highlighted Dr. Ruth Behar and her beautiful film, but also Dr. Laura Lamonic brought in her narrative, Cugos and Frijoles, understanding the Latino experience, the Latino Jewish experience. And that was an incredible lecture that she was able to, again, highlight those experiences with one another. And we also brought in the Afro-Latinx experience with Jasmine Mendez. She is from, her family is also from the Dominican Republic. And what was important about her lecture is that she talked about the memorialization of the Jewish refugee experience, but not of the atrocities that have occurred in the Dominican Republic. And so she wanted to talk about the importance of understanding those atrocities and how that has impacted generations from then. And it was an incredible series, very important to our museum because this was the second Latinx Heritage Month series that we've done here. Incredible feedback from people. And again, people who ask, how do we connect to the museum? These are our ways that we do that. We bring in history that isn't commonly talked about, again, talking about these narratives that are not, again, human rights issues that should be talked about in a space like this. Just this last month for Indigenous Heritage Month, we brought in stories about the atrocities that have occurred in Guatemala. Los Médicos de la Montaña was a beautiful film that highlighted the history of people, of doctors who went into the mountains during the Guatemalan Civil War, and what they've done to continue with indigenous practices to take care of the people in that area. An incredible film, very beautiful. We highlighted also Greg Deal's artwork during this month to break those stereotypes of indigenous people. And then lastly, we featured the film The Condor and the Eagle that talks about the global impact, right, of climate change, of environmental racism on indigenous communities. And that was an incredible film, again, that brings in these narratives that aren't commonly talked about. And we do this locally as well. We've worked with this organization, Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, TEJAS, for a couple of years now. We had the opportunity to take what they call toxic tours with several students that we have in one of our groups called Engines of Change, our student ambassador program. We were able to go on this toxic tour to learn about the environmental racism that's occurring here in the Houston area and how it's impacting communities of color. And again, we're connecting this to our human rights, right? We're connecting it to what's occurring in our communities and how it's impacting it. We've had we've had an honor to work with them, and I wanted to share with you a quick video so you could learn a little bit more about what they do and why we have included them.
And this is Buffalo Bayou. When we had the floods, all this was underwater. So everything that's in those chemicals is being washed off into the Galveston Bay.
When we talk about environmental degradation and environmental racism, if you don't live there, if you don't see it, and if you don't experience it, you think it's non-existent. We started TEJAS to do basically whatever it takes to get an educated community to then resist and fight the challenges that they face. When Anna and I started doing toxic tours, we started to open up people's eyes to our conditions of life down here.
Less than half a mile away, there are landing flats where people go out and actually fish, sustenance fishing. There is a community less than a quarter a mile away with some of the highest rates of upper respiratory issues.
Imagine if this were on the other side of town. You think they would tolerate it? There's no excuse for it, but it's just the way they deal with low-income communities.
The Houston Ship Channel is 52 miles long, and it's the longest stretch of refinery and chemical plants in the world. So it's massive. We live in the area that chemical plants are concentrated in. Manchester has been around since 1836, and it's been predominantly Hispanic. It's literally surrounded by too much industry.
This is a residence that's been here for a long time. A lot of people think that the industry was here long before the community was. It's a good example of who was here first.
The residents of Manchester are exposed to 7 cancer-causing chemicals, and what that translates into is poor health. There's leukemia, there's asthma, there's the illnesses that we know come because of air toxins and air pollution. Everybody's entitled to clean air, clean water, and a clean space, right? And we don't speak up for ourselves and for our children and our schools. Who else is going to be left out there to speak?
So I share this with you because, again, going to our Human Rights Gallery, which is 4 walls in the space that talks about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, how do atrocities happen, who are our exemplars, and what can you do? And we feature this organization in the What Can You Do section because we want people to learn about local organizations in the Houston area and also globally and how they can volunteer, how can they take action to impact, right? To take back, to learn from these things and to also be able to provide their own experiences, their own skills on these organizations. So this is an incredible organization. I ask you to take a look at them. They are doing global work as well. Not only locally, they are bringing to light a lot of environmental racism that's occurring around the world, especially in Latin America. One of the things that we also do here at Holocaust Museum Houston is we do artivism, which is a act of artwork and activism. And we do this with our students in workshops to give them the opportunity to bring in their own, their own to the activism that they want to talk about, what they're passionate about. And we do that through art. We've invited local artists to come in and work with our students to talk about their stories, their passions, their narratives. And we use the art form to do that, because many of our students we know may not feel comfortable speaking or talking in front of groups to feel about their passion, but through artwork they can do that. And also we've emphasized as well poetry as well, and writing workshops. I also want to give props to another educator here at our museum who has done amazing work. Her name is Laurie Garcia, and she manages the program Educator in Motion. And as everyone has gone into a virtual format, Laurie Garcia ran this program for a couple of years now. She's been running this program in school, K through 12 schools, in English and Spanish, presenting on the Holocaust and human rights education. She has focused on early childhood to 5th grade, on character building, on empathy building as well. And then the upper grade levels are focused more on the history of the Holocaust, genocide, and human rights. She has done incredible work, and as well, this is a virtual learning experience. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about her work, please reach out to her at lgarcia@hmh.org. This has been a program that gives the opportunity for students who cannot come to our building physically, for her to go out into the schools or virtually now go into their spaces as well. And I wanted to highlight an important institute that we do have coming up in 2021. This year, we were actually supposed to host this institute during the summer, but unfortunately, because of COVID, of course, it was canceled. This is an institute for educators in which we're going to bring 30 to 40 educators from Latin America and the United States to work together, to collaborate with one another, learning about the Holocaust, human rights, and social justice. If you are an educator, please go on our website and look up this information, because this is going to be a great way for us to learn about what's happening in Latin America and what's been happening globally with Holocaust education. This is a great opportunity, and it will be occurring in July of this coming year, and it will be through a virtual format just for safety, since we don't know how we're going to be during that time. Again, lastly, I'll say it very clearly, representation matters. It's been an incredible 5 years that I've been here and seeing this museum progress to what it is now, being a bilingual space, being representative of communities. Again, I keep emphasizing narratives, bringing those narratives that aren't commonly talked about, genocides that aren't commonly talked about. And we feel that in this space, we're able to progress and talk about issues that aren't, I guess, commonly talked about. But the representation is important, because we want our students, our constituents, our public to feel comfortable in this space in order for us to be able to continue the teachings of the Holocaust, to continue teaching about other atrocities. So if you'd like to reach out to me, my email address is here at mtovar@hmh.org. Or if you'd like to follow us on Instagram or Twitter, you can follow us at Boniac Center, or our YouTube channel also features some of the events that I did talk about previously, some recordings that we've had at the Boniac Center. Again, you can always reach out to me if you have any questions as an educator, or even if you want to learn a little bit more about what we're doing through the Latino initiatives, please reach out. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that very informative presentation and all of the great work that you are doing. I want to start by asking you a question that came from Martin, and it's several questions in one. And he asks, can you speak a bit more about the culture of Jewish Latinos and Latinas? For example, which countries have the greatest number of Jews? And in general, are the Jewish cultural traditions different from one Latin American country to another? And is there a significant concern about anti-Semitism currently in various Latin American countries?
Right. So What I've learned through Dr. Laura Lamonic, and again, I'm going to emphasize her work because she's done an incredible job on highlighting this history. She doesn't specify exactly where there's a larger population. I mean, it's sporadic, right? But through the museum, we've tried to connect this history to the Ladino language, to the Sephardic history as well. And so there isn't much difference if you look at her book talking about cujo and frijoles, right? So it's very common that you'll see that there is a connection between the foods that we eat, some of the words that we say, and also you could probably see through the Sephardic history that there was times when our Catholicism obviously was taken more, it was seen as something, trying to find the word. Catholicism was accepted, right, in society, and Judaism was sometimes hidden in our Latino culture. And what I do like about what Dr. Lamonic has talked about is just the way that you can see some of that Jewish history within our families. Sometimes some of the last names in our own Latinidad is of a Jewish descendants. I was told once that someone asked me if I had Jewish descendants in my family because of Tovar. And I don't think I do. I've done some research and I haven't found any, but I would recommend for Martin to read her book and look into it a bit more. I can't fully answer that question for him, but there is, on the basis of anti-Semitism, I think it's been, what's been lacking is the lack of understanding, right? And that's why I think it's so important that we do have Latino initiatives at Holocaust Museum Houston, because there has been anti-Semitism in our culture because of the fact that there hasn't been a space for people to come and ask questions. And I think we are providing that. Especially, I know that when our educator in motions go into schools, many students don't understand, right? They don't understand Jewish culture, Jewish history. And so it's important for us to do that, right? To go into communities and talk about the history so people can learn. I think that's been the main thing, is just that the lack of knowledge. Mhm.
Thank you, Michelle. We had another question from Susan, who was really interested in a couple of the resources that you mentioned, including one of the books.
Mhm.
And you showed the cover of it. And
Yes.
I'm wondering if you would spell, not that one, it was on the slide.
Yes.
Would you be able to spell out the name of the person that you referenced? I think it was, you said Christina at the USHMM had done some research on this
On
person.
Anthony Acevedo, yes, it's ACE. Let me make sure. VADO, yes. So you can
Awesome.
actually Google him, and it'll link you to USHMM to learn more about his story. And what's beautiful, on their website, they have images of the diary in which you can see his writing and everything. It's a wonderful artifact.
And spell the last name one more time.
It is ACEVADO. And if I'm wrong, I apologize.
That's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about if you've received any pushback or criticism about a Holocaust Museum taking the lead on creating these kinds of partnerships and working so much with human rights and in these kinds of exhibits.
Yes, and I first want to thank Rosa. Thank you for correcting my misspelling. I appreciate that. Yes, and that is, it's been, through the time that I've been here, there has been some pushback from the community. Some people have asked, why is this relevant? How is this relevant to the Holocaust? We've had some people say that these human rights issues are not a part of a Holocaust museum. But I simply say that, yes, they are. They are human rights issues. And it's important for us to understand the history of the Holocaust, but also make connections to the present and to understand what's currently occurring here. For example, not too long ago, our museum did put out a public statement on the children who were being separated at the border. And so, family separations. So many of some of our donors, some of our community did say that that was not something that we should talk about. But we did have some support from our survivors, that they themselves said that they felt that it was important that as a museum we stood in solidarity, because they themselves had experienced family separation in some way. And I felt that was important. But through that pushback, we ourselves, we try to be as respectful as possible. And we want people to understand that human rights is not political. And it's important for us to, again, go back to our mission, understanding through the lessons of the Holocaust, right? And understanding the dangers of hatred, discrimination, and apathy, and talking about that, the relevance of it today.
I appreciate your museum's willingness and ability to take a stand. I think it's probably somewhat of an art form to balance the particular uniqueness of the Holocaust and the universal messages, and trying to bring that all together. I think you've done an amazing job. Can you tell us about what other programs and partnerships you have in the future? Like, how else do you plan to expand these programs?
Definitely. We want to expand to other languages. We want to be multilingual. The third most spoken language here in Houston is Vietnamese. So we want to bring in much more of that history of the community, because it's important, right? We want to make sure that the Vietnamese community feels comfortable. Arabic is also a common language here in the Houston area. So again, we want to highlight and create an inclusive space for them, audio, visually, through that. And also, again, through representation, hiring staff that represents the community. We're definitely working to expand our public programs to go beyond the Holocaust narrative. Again, you've seen some of our human rights work, and we want to continue on with human rights education. We're hoping that in a couple of years, we're going to have a Human Rights Institute for educators, and scholars will be here. And eventually, hopefully, we want to create a conference in which publications can occur as well.
Are there other Holocaust museums that are doing similar work to what you're doing?
Now, I know that Dallas has highlighted the North American genocide. I know that San Antonio is working on creating inclusive Spanish work, but I'm not sure if they've done the exact work we've been doing. I again commend Christina. She has been doing amazing work at in the DC Museum, and I see her as a role model, because she's been doing, again, bringing that voice to a space that isn't commonly, heard. But I think I need to do some more research and see what's going out there. And I think this is a great effort. What we're doing is collaborating, right? And something I would need to do also is collaborate with other folks and learn more. Yeah.
Well, I hope we can do more. I look to our center and to other centers in the hopes that, as you said, how important representation is, and being able to see yourself in these exhibits and museums, and not just Holocaust museums, but museums in general. I think there's a lot of work that can be done.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
We had another question that came from Helen, and she writes, can we attend your virtual presentation next summer, and how do we get on the list to find out more about it?
Okay, you can email me at mtovar@hmh.org. Currently, the Silverman Institute is only for educators, but I think, in this time, we're working on, we're going to be flexible, right? I know that we'll have some public programs. We usually invite scholars to do public programs during our institutes that are open to everyone. So reach out to me via my email. You can also go to our website and you can find more information there. So definitely send me an email. I can add you to our newsletter, and I'll keep you informed on what we're doing here. Mm-hmm.
So I want to read you just a couple of comments that came in. Linda from Facebook said, you have done an amazing job finding what unites our communities. And there's another one from Elena who says, thank you for all of your great work that you are doing.
Thank you so much.
So Michelle, I really hope that we can continue to find ways to work together and grow our programs, and that we can learn from you, and that what you're doing spreads far and wide, and that there's lots of opportunities for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm grateful for this collaboration. This is such a great opportunity. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for being with us today. I want to remind everyone that this program was recorded, and you can find it on our website starting tomorrow. Please feel free to share it with others. It's on the past Lunch and Learns page. I want to take a special moment to thank our whole team at the Holocaust Center for Humanity, who is working so hard to keep all of our programs and presentations running at full speed, including ones like this, our Speakers Bureau, Professional Development for Teachers. Again, we have a program this Thursday on spiritual resistance, and creating lots of online resources and opportunities for people to get involved. Thank you to Richard Green, who's running the technical side of this show behind the scenes. He's our museum and technology director. Also a huge thank you to Dee Simon, our executive director, and our entire team, Nicole Bella, Laurie Burchell-Cohen, Julia Thompson, Paul Regelbrug, Rosa Campos, Sydney Dradel, Ellie Selesky, Amanda Davis, Katie Lawrence, and our interns, all of who are an essential part of making our Holocaust Center run. Thank you also to Michelle Quinones, who provided closed captioning for us today on this program. Next week, please join us for a presentation by Holocaust survivor Aggie Day. Aggie was born in Yugoslavia, but when the Nazis invaded in 1941, she and her family walked 196 miles to Budapest, Hungary. And Aggie spent the war in hiding, first in a convent and later with non-Jewish families. Please join us next week for Aggie's remarkable story. And again, thank you to all of you who donated during this program for Giving Tuesday. There's still lots of time to do so. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back here next week. This concludes our program.